Hey there, darlings. Welcome to the Farmer's Table. If you're new here, my name is Jess, and here in my kitchen I love to share my passion for preparing and preserving and sharing real food. If you're not new here, welcome back. I'm glad you are all here. Today we are going to be working on a canning project. I've been on a mission the last couple of weeks to create some conveniences for myself. From scratch lifestyle, homesteading lifestyle, we homestead, is choosing to opt out of conveniences. And obviously we are offered so many conveniences in this modern day life, but so often it is at the cost of health or finances or peace or whatever. So I find myself in a position sometimes where I could really use some convenience, but I don't like the convenient options that I'm offered. So I'm making my own. So I have started trying some different recipes for meals in jars. I'm trialing multiple things, and I am not going to bring them to you until I have cooked them, canned them, opened them, eaten them, and approved that I would like to use those recipes again. So today we're going to be making a curry chicken base. I got this recipe from a Substack called Our Off-Grid Life. I will put a link to their Substack. I don't know them, I just found their publication on Substack, and they had done a couple of posts about meals in jars. I was in the middle of searching meals in jars recipes. I'm sure that's why an algorithm showed it to me. The recipe I'm showing you is what they called curry chicken base, and I'm going to show you the canning of this, and then I'm going to also show you how we eat it. I'm going to open one of the jars that I made in the last batch. This uses chicken thighs, which are a fattier cut, and honestly any canning recipe that I ever make that's a meal in a jar or any sort of canning that calls for chicken, I pretty primarily only use chicken thighs because I personally feel like chicken breast dries out way more than I like eating. I've heard a lot of people be like, no, it's really good, and I'm like, but what's your like baseline of good when it comes to chicken? Because we might not have the same opinion on that. Chicken thighs though, they can really beautifully, they taste really good, they stay moist, and even after canning, I find them really delicious. This meal is really good. First, I need to get my canner started up. Okay, just a little layer down there in the bottom. Now, I inevitably will get asked every single time I show canning on here. People say, hey, I thought you're not supposed to use a canner on a glass top stove. When we bought this house, this is the stove it came with, and my logic was, well, if I replace it preemptively, or if I replace it because it broke, I'm replacing the stove either way. I decided to just take the risk because the worst case scenario is I would have to replace it rather than replace it on the front end. Not canning wasn't an option for me. Like, I'm not gonna just be like, oh, I guess I can't can or use cast iron. So with some glass top stoves, they're induction, and some induction ranges will not work with certain canners, so you do have to look into that. But a lot of it is just the risk that it could break. I have been tempted before to run two canners on here at the same time, and I've never done that because I think that weight I could see that potentially being too much. But with just one, I'm just very careful not to drop it. So I prepped my chicken thighs. These are all cut in like 1-inch-ish chunks, and then I also prepped these potatoes. So I just got to cut a few onions here, and then we'll start assembling our jars, and about that time I think the canner will be about ready. This is all low acid food. Any meat, anytime you're canning meat, you have to use a pressure canner in order for that to be deemed safe. So for this recipe, this came from that Substack, and I actually increased the amount of seasoning that they called for in their original recipe because I just like cooking with a lot of seasoning. Whenever you are pressure canning something, you can up the seasoning, like that's fine. The thing is, you don't want to up the seasoning so much that you're creating like a paste. The liquid of the jar still needs to be soupy, and it still needs to be able to move freely. So today I'm doing 7 quarts, which is 1 canner load. Typically when you're canning meat, you can count on about a pound of meat to fill a pint and about 2 pounds of meat to fill a quart. This has other things in it. This has the seasoning, the potatoes, the onions, and therefore it's not gonna be 2 pounds of meat per jar. It's a little over 1. I've got about 9 pounds of chicken thighs here that I'm going to divvy up between these 7 jars. I did not trim my chicken very much. Chicken thighs are very fatty, and if I were going to be cooking those for dinner, I may be more inclined to trim them a little more heavily, like big chunks of fat, but I actually left them all intact. I'm going to put all of these ingredients together, put the seasoning in, and then I'm going to pour water over them. You can use chicken broth if you want, but with chicken thighs being so fatty, I've found with this particular recipe that just doing water, you have plenty of flavor. And that fat's largely gonna render off and end up in the juice of the jar. All right, I'm dicing my onions into kind of small bits like this. For the potatoes, these are peeled and washed. Any like blemish spots, any dark places in them, I went ahead and peeled those off or cut those out. With best practice when you are canning potatoes is that you want them to be very clean. Anytime you're canning root vegetables, you want to make sure that they're peeled and fully washed. So not only are home canned meals in jars or prepared convenience foods great for the convenience, it's also a great thing to do for a preparedness mindset. You know, we went 8 days when Hurricane Helene came through without power here in South Carolina, and it really tested a lot of the areas of preparedness that I had kind of taken for granted, because I was always like, oh, we have tons of outdoor cooking options. I can just cook outside. And when Helene happened, I mean, it was the fall, it was pretty nice out. And so for the most part that worked, but on the day that it was like super windy and rainy and we were dealing with that, it wasn't so easy to just go cook outside. Another thing is to store your food long term if you're able to make it shelf stable, because obviously to store this chicken prior to thawing it and preparing it for this canning session, it's in my freezer, and so that's energy that I'm having to repeatedly pay for. It's definitely a motivator for me. The convenience thing is primarily the biggest motivator. So I'm going just a little over halfway full on the chicken. When you are pressure canning meat, you do not want to like pack it in there. Just drop it in. You can give it a shake so it can settle down and you don't have any big bubble spaces, but it does need for the liquid that's in there to be able to like move around it. Anytime I'm assembling meals in jars like this, I actually really do like to get all of my ingredients prepared ahead of time. That way I just know when to turn the canner on, and it just makes it a lot more streamlined. I'm not that kind of cook. Like, I'm typically doing things on the fly as I go. This is one area where I really do appreciate that efficiency. So that was right at 9 pounds, and by doing just slightly over, I don't know, maybe that would be considered 3/4 of the way. Some of these are definitely closer to half, but that 9 pounds split between these 7 jars. Got clean hands. Now I'm gonna do a 1/2 cup of potatoes per jar. I diced way too many potatoes, look at that. Potatoes with dinner it is. Unfortunately, that's what I get when I multitask. I was doing math with my kids while I was doing those, and it just started peeling. Just kept peeling. I figured it would be too much. This is gonna be too much onion too. All right, about 1/4 cup of onion per jar. That's fine. I'll put those potatoes and onions together in a bag and stick them in the fridge, and then tonight I will toss them with oil and seasoning and air fry them together, and we'll have that with whatever we decide to eat for dinner. So their original recipe calls for per jar 2 teaspoons of curry powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric, a 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I upped that, and I also added this tandoori masala, which has a lot of the same seasonings in it. It has turmeric, ginger, but it also has, and garlic. It also has coriander, paprika, cumin, cinnamon, amateur chilies, clove, and mace. So it's just more flavor. So as I said, I'll link the original recipe, and then I'll tell you kind of about what I did. And again, know that it doesn't have to really be exact on the seasoning as long as it's not a paste. You can suit this to your preferences. All right, so I'm doing almost a teaspoon of turmeric, 2 full teaspoons of curry in each jar, and they're heaping. I had a complicated relationship with Indian food for a long time because I spent a couple weeks in India several years ago, and actually got food poisoning when I was there, and so it took me a while to come back to Indian food, but I have thoroughly come back now. I love it. It's one of my favorite like things to eat. Just all Indian food is so delicious in my opinion. I love the complexity of flavors. And my kids love Indian food, thankfully. So this is a good introduction to these flavors if you are, you know, new to this, because it's mild. And of course you could spice this up a lot. You could add cayenne and stuff. I'm keeping them on the mild side because my kids do like it like this. And the goal of this is convenience. So I'm not just trying to make things that just I would like. I'm gonna do about a teaspoon of garlic powder per jar, and then about a half a teaspoon of black pepper, maybe just a little higher than that. I'm doing a teaspoon of salt per jar. So they say in their original recipe that you can add bouillon, in which case you would not want to add salt also. With this much seasoning in it, plus the fact that I upped it, and this much fat in the meat, I didn't feel like you needed bouillon here. I didn't feel like you needed broth here. And then I'm adding a teaspoon of this tandoori masala mix. I will put a link to where I got this. I just got it online. You don't have to add this either. I'm sure it would be enough flavor without it, but I just love these flavors so much. So this is called raw pack canning, when you put everything in your jar raw. You then put the lid on the jar, you put it in the canner, and during the 90 minutes that we're going to process these jars in the canner to make them shelf stable, obviously that's going to cook everything that's in here. There's also hot pack canning, which is where you take cooked ingredients and then you pack them in the jars and then you process them to seal them. And it's still a long process, and it does cook them further and obviously changes the texture and everything. There's a reason why when you see like blogs and different things talking about meals in jars, they always show you the raw pack before it's cooked, because it's so much prettier before. Once it's cooked, the colors get pretty dull. It's not as much to look at. So I'm going to take this food, which is cool. It's not super cold. You know, the amount of time it took me to cut all that chicken, cut the potatoes, go through all of this. It's been sitting on the counter for a little bit and brought it up to temperature some. But I'm going to be putting it in the simmering hot canner. So I like to go ahead and pour boiling water over to bring the temperature up some, so we don't have any risk of thermal shock. What you would not want to do at all ever is prepare all your jars ahead of time, stick them in the refrigerator, and take them straight from the refrigerator into the canner, because you'd end up with a bunch of broken jars if you did that. Another thing, I already know somebody's gonna say something. When you debubble your jars, you need to take something and slide it down the sides like this to allow your liquid to get all the way down and release any bubbles. Put one down in the middle, kind of move it around. Technically, best practice, you're supposed to do this with a plastic knife or debubbler tool, because the risk of using metal is that you could nick the inside of your jar, causing it to break whenever you can in it. I don't have a plastic knife. I don't have a debubbler tool. I have butter knives. Obviously, I'm not just jamming this in here like a caveman. I'm being gentle and easy. You know, I reuse canning jars over and over. You know, whenever a jar of jelly is in the fridge, how many times is a knife gonna get scraped all around the inside of that jar, and then it's gonna get washed and put back on the shelf to get canned in again. So this is a common sense thing for me. Just be mindful that you're not cracking your jar while you're debubbling. But you do want to thoroughly debubble, and then as that causes your level to go down, because the liquid goes down to fill up more spaces, if you need to, you will just put a little bit more liquid in it. These are all pretty close. You want to make sure your contents are covered with liquid, so I'll probably add just a little bit more, but you want about 1 inch to 1.25 inches head space on these. Alright, so these are all looking good. I've got a good amount of head space there. I've got, you know, about 1 inch. Take this rag, it's damp, and wipe all the rims off here to make sure that there's nothing in the way of my jar's sealing. And then put the lids on. Put the rings on, what's called finger tight. Basically, you're tightening it down with your fingertips. You want it good and secure, but you don't want to like wrench it down with all your strength. All right, so this is starting to simmer. I'm going to go ahead and put these jars in. Mine holds 7 quarts, not touching. Just have to arrange them around a little bit to make sure that they're not going to be bumping up against each other. So with my particular canner, it does not have a gasket, so you just oil this edge every time you use it. And oh shooky, this is not ideal. I've got it on here backwards. Carefully turn it so that I do not tell you guys about not breaking my stovetop and then break it in the same video. All right, so this lines up here. Make sure it's level. Now I'm going to tighten these down, and I do this on just like high heat. My stove has a power boil function, but I don't use that whenever I am bringing my canner up to heat, because I've found my jar siphon more because like fast temperature changes do that. So I just do it on like the regular high setting. All right, I don't know how well this is going to show, but you can see the steam is steadily streaming out of my canner, and it has been for the last few minutes, which tells me that this is clear and not blocked. So I'm going to take my weight on 10 pounds pressure, drop it on there, and let the canner come up to pressure. All right, that rattle tells me that we're up to pressure. 90 minutes on the timer now for the quarts. If you wanted to do pints, you could do that with this recipe. You just have, obviously, the ingredients that you put in each jar, and then you process those for 75 minutes. So while this processes, I'm actually going to open a jar of this curry chicken from my last batch. This is what the jars look like after they've gone through the canner. This is one from the last batch. I realized after I was kind of cleaning up here, I think I forgot to put the ginger in these jars. This one I forgot the turmeric. So, you know, one day I'll have a recipe with all of the things in it. This is why I did wide mouth jars this time, because it's a lot easier to just dump out. Alright, this is what it looks like coming right out of the jar. I'm going to stir in some coconut milk. I think the original recipe said that they stir in like a cup of coconut milk. Oh man, I made a mess. I just put the whole can in, just because if I put part of this in my fridge, I'll forget it's there. And bring this to a simmer so it's heated all the way through. That's what it looks like. I'm just going to put it over some rice. Now, this is really brothy with that whole extra can of coconut milk added. I really like that. I like it just like this. But if you didn't want it to be that soupy, you could just add coconut cream, or you don't have to add anything, or you could use some arrowroot powder or some cornstarch to thicken it up. But I like it just like this. If I had some cilantro, I would put cilantro all on top of this. I know it doesn't look like a whole lot, but it's so full of flavor and so nourishing and delicious and so easy, especially whenever I didn't do all of this before. When I can just come in, open a jar, and eat this like 7 minutes later, that's fantastic. Serving wise, whenever you take that quart jar and you add a can of coconut milk to it and then you serve it over rice, I'm comfortably serving like 4, like I would say good sized bowls. Now, this is a daddy bowl. You probably get 3 of these kinds of servings out of that. Okay, as soon as my timer went off, I turned the heat off and went outside, because you have to let the canner come down from pressure. And there's nothing that makes me want to go outside into the garden like being stuck in the house. I typically only do these jobs on rainy days, but we haven't had a lot of rainy days, and I really also need to get this stuff done. Alright, very, very hot jars, but they're coming out looking good. Alright, there we have it. 7 meals that I don't have to cook later. Isn't that awesome? Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. If you want to see more meals in jars, let me know. I've got a list of things that I'm currently making and trialing, and I'd love to share them with you. I bless you. Until next time.